Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to a Faculty of Graduate Studies conversation as part of Black History Month, focusing on why Black history and Black History Month matter. As those of you who might be involved in African American studies will know, we have Carter Woodson to thank in the United States in 1926 for creating what was then called Negro History Week, from February 12th, which is the birth date of Abraham Lincoln, to February 20th, the birth date of Frederick Douglass. Now, Woodson championed the necessity of making the history of Black people public knowledge, a public conversation about the American Republic's actual history. While it took until the American bicentennial to recognize Black History Month officially, although the month was created first by the Black United Students Organization at Kent State University, and celebrated first in 1970. Black History Month as an exercise in memory. It's an exercise in remembering histories that have been silenced and dismissed by various racialized and colonizing power dynamics. Those dynamics seek to organize consciousness, literally understanding, logic, and sense in motivated, imbalanced ways, but in such ways that when you're brought up in them from the get-go, they regularize and normalize your perception and how you understand what becomes your reality. As part of that reality, you'll learn that history is this and people are that. Now, Black History Month matters to interrupt, challenge, and correct that system, the experience of which can create a desire, then a need, a seeking out of other correctives. For the corrective of Black History Month in Canada, we have Jean Augustine to thank in 1995, the first Black woman elected to the House of Commons in Canada. For the public conversation of Black History Month today, however, we have three very special guests to thank, whom I'd like to introduce right now. First, we have Gertrude Mianda, who is currently the director of the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research on Africa and its diasporas at York University. She's a professor in the Gender and Women's Studies program at Glendon College and in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at York, of which she was chair from 2011 to 2015. As a sociologist and African feminist, her research work on gender and development focuses on globalization, decolonization, and post-colonialism, particularly on Africa, as well as on immigration. Her research on African immigration focuses on Francophone Africans in the minority Francophone community in Canada, examining especially their economic and social integration. Now, some of our recent publications include Francophone Sub-Saharan African immigrants organizing tontines in Toronto as a basis for solidarity and integration, or Central African education, indigenous to Western. Another recent publication, it looks at Behind Diversity and Inclusive Politics, a reading from a Francophone scholar at the margin I refuse it. You are central to me. Moving along. Coming to York from the world of fundraising, former manager of a team for nonprofit organizations, Camellia Bryan is currently a PhD candidate at the Schulich School of Business at York, winner of the Anthony P. Quinliff Scholarship and the Elia Scholar Award, which is York's most prestigious award for incoming PhD students. The main objective of her research is to help organizations unlock the potential of stigmatized individuals as our workforce and broader society becomes increasingly diverse. She studies stigma identity management from both the perspective of the stigmatized and external audiences' reactions to these identity management strategies. Beyond stigma identity management, she's also interested in examining how workplace interactions and relationships can lead to destigmatization. Now, to give you a sense of the relevance and application of her research, she has articles in submission to the Academy of Management Journal, as well as the Journal of Applied Psychology. Similarly, she's presented her research at such international conferences and organizations as the International Society of Justice Research, the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, the Canadian Psychological Association, and multiply, I think she's an annual guest, sometimes twice, at the Academy of Management Conference, which is the main big deal in the field. Last but not least, we have Jake Okechukwu Effoduh, who is a PhD candidate at Osgoode Hall Law School and a Vanier scholar. His doctoral research is on the legitimization of artificial intelligence for human rights in Anglophone Africa, particularly on how such legitimization impacts the norms of pursuing human rights, but also on whether and if those rights are realized. One of his questions is whether AI technology can solve the popular legitimization crises that activist forces in the region currently face. Jake has been a solicitor and advocate of the Supreme Court of Nigeria for 10 years. He has also gained programmatic research and academic experiences from working across 21 African countries. He's a Queen Elizabeth Scholar and an Advanced Scholars Fellow with the Center of Law, Technology, and Society in Canada, and also serves as the youngest member on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council, helping states to identify key future shocks for the next generation and proposing policy opportunities that will build resiliency today in the face of these risks. Jake embarrasses me because Jake holds 2 master's degrees in law, one from Oxford, another from Osgoode. In the last 5 years, he's delivered lectures at the University of Abuja in Nigeria, Ontario Tech University in Canada, the University of Cape Town in South Africa, Oxford University, and here at York, where he serves as a teaching assistant in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. So, it's very humbling, actually, to read these bios, and I'm really appreciative that we can have you as guests to have this conversation about Black History Month. So let me turn it over to you, Gertrude, to start us off.
Thank you so much, Dean Loeb, for your warm welcome and your introduction. Thank you again for inviting me to this conversation about Black History Month and why it matters in people's lives. I would like to say at outset that it does matter, given the experience of anti-Black racism that Black people encounter daily within our society. The society tends to forget the history of Black people and ignores their contribution and achievements. That is why Black History matters, because it gives us the opportunity to honor their legacy, the legacy of Black people who came to this land and experienced many obstacles because of the history of enslavement. It is not only to remember that painful part of the past, but it is also a period to celebrate the achievements and contribution they have made to make Canada the country that we know today. We can name few of them, going back to 1600 or 1700, but let us stay close to us. You have named one of them, the Honorable Jean Augustine, who has played a big role for us to celebrate today Black History Month along with Rosemary Sadler. But we can also name Michael Jean, the first Black woman Governor General. We can also name the first Black man, the Senator Donald Oliver, who also played a role for this Black History Month. Those are just few people among many that we can look upon as a role model for the young Black generation. But for me, looking back to the past, it is with the intention to learn and be inspired by them in order for us not to be discouraged, so that we can strive to better execute the present in this multicultural context in which we live, with the hope to create a better future. Given the current context in North America, with the killing of Black bodies, with now the COVID-19 affecting people at the intersection of race, gender, albinism, sexuality, class, and with data indicating that the people who have been most affected are Black. So Black History Month makes it possible for us to engage in broader discussion about anti-Black racism and Blackness. Canada is well known to be a multicultural country in which Black people represent a community of about 1,200,000 of population. And it means that Black community is also diverse. Our country is made up in part of Black people who can trace their roots back for many generations, whose ancestors came as early as 1600s or 1700s, and also of those who have come as part of the contemporary international migration here. Among those Black immigrants, 92% were born in Caribbean, Bermuda, Latin America, and Africa. They are diverse because of the history of enslavement and history of European colonization. They are diverse, the diversity of language, of ethnicity or culture, of religion, but they all contribute to the socio-economic and cultural growth of Canadian society. It is important to mention that Black people, along with Canada's indigenous peoples, are the group that are the most facing racism. We cannot deny that, it's a fact. As those who came centuries ago, Black people continue today to face similar challenges related to labor market integration, income inequality, difficult access to housing and health care, discrimination in the education system, discrimination in the judicial system. In this condition, how can we, as Black people, come together to collectively face, fight, and dismantle the anti-Black racism in society and within the institution that we belong to? How we define our Blackness may be a key to achieving equality and dignity in this multicultural Canadian society. How does it mean for me as a Black woman, immigrant, coming from Africa, Francophone, being university professor in the institution which claims to be bilingual in officially bilingual country. For those with whom I interact, my Blackness will always be made in reference to Africa, with its negative image of poverty, internal conflict, and because I am a woman, it is always in reference to the continent where women are oppressed. How can I live my Blackness in the space where Blackness is predominantly defined only in reference to enslavement? Leaving my African Blackness invisible. In Africa, I was African colonized, a Luba woman from Kasai who had the privilege of being educated. But since my childhood, I knew that my African sisters and brothers were taken away from Africa across the Atlantic and were dispersed in the world. Coming to Canada, I realized my Blackness because the way people classified me made me conscious of being Black. I experienced Blackness along with its psychological effects because of being constantly denied my humanity, even though having been colonized before coming here, my humanity was already denied. Colonization marked Africans as savage. Africans were less than human beings. They were exposed in zoo in Europe during the middle 1800s to legitimize colonization's civilizing mission. Coming to Canada, I experienced the dimension of being denied my humanity, but also of constantly being reminded that others thought I did not belong here. You are from Africa, and the history of Blackness does not refer to you. But I am in this society as Black woman experiencing anti-Black racism at the intersection of my multiple identity, African, immigrant, Francophone, privileged university professor, by the way, in which that position is also constantly questioned because of who I am. Yesterday, I attended a panel of emerging Black scholars we organized at Tubman. I was so happy because those young Black people gave me hope. Black Canadians of the second generation see themselves as a community of Blacks, regardless of their diverse origins. What binds them together is this sense of being Black in the space they occupy. After all, Africa is our distant motherland. We belong to the space where we are as human beings. Because we all belong to the constituency of human beings, because we have our humanity in common, it is our task as Blacks and whites, non-Blacks, to ask, how do we participate in the process of anti-Blackness in our society and within our institutions? The burden cannot be on Black people alone.
Thank you. Camellia, do you want to start? Sorry, you're on mute. Oh, still, there we go.
Oh, could you repeat the question, please?
Would you like to, Gertrude's statement is finished. Do you want to take us onto what you have to say?
Oh, Yeah, so I really enjoyed Dr. Gertrude's statement. And I think the really important part about Black History Month as well is thinking about how Black people were beyond just simply being slaves and thinking about a lot of our talents, a lot of our capabilities. Because I think a lot of the times when we hear about Black History Month, we mostly focus on the stories of how much we've been marginalized and persecuted in society. And I think sometimes it could be a bit demoralizing. So just hearing about some of the great accomplishments and some of the great things that can be achieved in Black history is really beneficial, as well as thinking about ways that you can also really support Black communities and really changing a lot of these structures. I think that's a really fundamental thing that we can also do it in Black History Month. I know there's like a lot more conversations about allyship, and we'll probably have conversations about that later on. But that's something that I think everyone can do in a way to be involved in Black History Month and changing how Black people are seen and just changing the identity as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're getting into a bit of the conversation part, yeah. But it really struck me as Gertrude was talking, and I was thinking about your research, Camellia, on, you know, all the effects of stigmatization, but also moving to destigmatization. And Gertrude talking about the hope of, at the Tubman panel, with a diverse group of participants identifying, as Black individuals, but not in the same historical colonialized perspective. And so that feeling seems like part of a destigmatizing, self-identifying process. But I wonder also, I wonder the forces at play. I mean, you know them from your research in marketing, the forces at play to try to stigmatize, because there will be a market for that, has to be battled by, the kind of situations Gertrude described, where people are refusing to accept that stigma. Do you have a sense of hope on this?
I am pretty hopeful about this. And well, of course, I wouldn't be doing my research if I wasn't hopeful that these things can be changed in organizations. Because they are showing that increase, especially with the recent social movements that happened last summer, a lot of people are starting to educate themselves more, and they're reflecting on themselves and their identities and how they see marginalized identities, particularly Black identities. And I think that can really change destigmatization, because you are right. You can't simply destigmatize just by being the stigmatized actor, because if you're marginalized, maybe in your community, you can feel not marginalized, like if I'm around other Black people, but once I leave the safety of the Black community, I don't have that experience anymore. So I need other people to see my identity as less stigmatized. I can try to resist it. So when I'm around people who are other identities, there's actually a really interesting research that shows when you have something that's devalued, but you're very open and you show pride in it, it can actually challenge people's identities and perceptions of it rather than downplaying it. So if you're, for example, a professional Black person, but you're open about your Black identity and you don't downplay it, it can change how other people see it versus if you really try to hide it and really mask it and just really assimilate.
Yeah. I mean, and there are lots of similarities across many groups about the necessity of pride, and pride as a public function, changing the public discourse, because it has to be public. I mean, the private does a certain function, but the public nature and a repetitious sort of constancy of it is I think in part fundamental. I mean, yeah, it's completely interesting. Do you have other things you want to mention on Black History Month, or should we bring Jake into this conversation, who's been sitting in red York garb, very quietly?
Yeah. Oh, I think I'm good for now, so we can just move the conversation out to Jake.
Yeah, Jake, come on in.
How you doing, Thomas? Thanks. Yeah, I'm putting on my red Osgoode jacket, but with my Nigerian hat. So Black History Month at York. Great combination. Really great insight shared. I actually want to thank the Faculty of Graduate Studies at York for this very timely and relevant dialogue. Dean, thank you for putting this together, and to Anessa Albert as well for the support. I'm also excited to see Professor Mianda here, and Camellia Bryan. I feel that conversations on Black history are not only relevant, but they're quite central to centering the experiences and lives of we Black students and Black faculty, especially in this significant month and in this time of our history. So I guess your question is, what does Black History Month mean to me, right? Yeah, well, I think Prof. and Camellia has made really great insight on this point. For me, I think it's about three things: representation, remembrance, but most importantly about celebrating Black people. Why? Because it is significant to recognize that despite being in the minority, Black people have helped to build, to shape and to sustain communities, not only in Canada, but in communities across the world for more than 400 years, even before this country was called Canada. So Black History Month is about, honoring the enormous contributions of Black people, the contributions that we have made and continue to make in all sectors of society, including in the society that we're in, in education, research, and scholarship. But it's also about, remembering the long years of Black struggle. It's about Black resilience, Black innovation. I loved watching the NASA satellite video, which was about yesterday or so, and how they positioned the contributions of Black women that work at NASA. And I was like, this is the kind of stories we want to see, especially during Black History Month. So I think it's an opportunity for people to understand Black histories, but to go beyond stories of racism and slavery and to spotlight Black achievement. So we can celebrate the incredible journeys of Black leaders in our schools, in our faculties, in our community, by learning from them on how they've overcome adversity and continue to make an impact, today. So for me, I think it's an opportunity to hear the stories of Black people firsthand, and not just what the movies tell you, to touch base with us about the origins of our history and the opportunity to be educated on issues that concern we as Black people. And just like Camellia mentioned, on the ways that you can support or understand us as an ally. Finally, I would say that Black History Month is also about us, it's about me, as a Black Anglophone African, as a Nigerian Igbo grad student here. This is about centering my visibility and navigating my identity as a multiracial minority in a predominantly white space. So it's not just about educating others about what it means to be Black. It's also about we Black people sitting here and educating ourselves on the various ways that our cultures may differ, the ways that our experiences may differ, but may also intersect and connect us in ways that we can gain closure, gain affirmation and mutual support. So I would say that's what the Black History Month means to me.
I'm wondering if I can connect the sort of current idea that you just brought up, or you've all brought up, about celebrating and publicizing the current, and connect that to the idea of history, because what always freaks me out, and I try to signal it in my opening moments, my opening talk, was that even when you're looking at a white racial structure like Canada, notwithstanding its multicultural discourse, but its white power structure, or in the United States, and people talk about, oh, I know my history. It's like, you don't. Well, you may know your history in terms of one discourse, Canadian, but you don't know the history. If we don't celebrate and tell the stories of what people did to create the history, the women in NASA, absolutely. But that's the tip of the iceberg of how much national history is created with the participation of Black people in this country and in America. Then people don't know history. And it's then equally important when we're talking about you right here and all that you are achieving, because you are going to be creating history. And so people have to know that you are doing who you are, that you are doing it right now, so that 50 years from now, they will know the significance of your achievements, just as we're trying to do in terms of the past. So that celebration function is also about truth. you know, the actuality of history. We have to. Otherwise, people are just walking around in a kind of very protective lie, which is, you know, comforting, I suppose, to some people, but it's not about the reality. It's not about the history. It's a sanitized, particularized history. And that's where I think this kind of thing is really important. And the work that you're doing now is part of that, creating the reality of a history to come. Also known as, you know, Jake, you have to rewrite the law. You have to reorganize. Your work has to become successful. You have to make sure that human rights are assisted by technology if it goes that way. I mean, that's another conversation, perhaps. I mean, is it going to go that way? Is AI going to help?
Well, you know, what you talked about history is very important, because I think for a lot of Black scholars, we're trying to do work to prevent history from happening again, like the really terrible things from happening again. And, you know, my research is on the legitimization of artificial intelligence for human rights in Anglophone Africa. And, you know, I mean, I recognize that, you know, we've come a long way as Black people in the world, right? But there's an Igbo proverb that says, no man steps in the same river twice. So there's certain things we've dealt with in the past, but with globalization and new technology, new things, they're like new dragons that we have to deal with. And sometimes as Black academics, there are certain things that only we can actually spotlight, you know, because other people don't experience it. So they'll be unable to spotlight that. And when you reference my research, so we all know that AI is becoming such a strategic priority for a lot of countries, including Canada. And when we look at the way that the technology is being legitimized, a lot of states, especially Western states, they hype AI as, to say, okay, this is going to solve a lot of our problems. Automation is the way to go. But, you know, we all know that just like any other technology, it impacts the third world very differently. So AI is not just a silver bullet that will solve all our problems. You know, it will, and it already is perpetrating and exacerbating some of the extant issues and introduce new racial risk as well. So, Black people need to be critical of techno-heroic expectations of, of the use of AI, and consider the way by which this technology, as we see today, is infringing on the autonomy of Black people, on the transparency and privacy of Black people, how the use of AI is displacing jobs in the third world. Certain factories have closed down, displacing jobs of over 450,000 workers, and this is just February, right? How AI may perpetuate inequality and really, really critically advance this negative systemic biases. And there are tons of examples of how AI could do that. I'm not undermining the potential of artificial intelligence. In fact, my research is looking at the way that AI can be legitimized to cure a crisis and to advance human rights. But we need to interrogate the ways that AI may hegemonize Africans and Black people as well. And that's also part of my work. So you find that even though we talk a lot about the history and we say it's Black History Month, we want to celebrate Black history, Black contribution, a lot of us are still tied to providing solution or providing, research insights in these areas that concern us as well.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's very important. That brings me back to the importance of history. If we go back to the history will teach us the way this global world is exploiting people from the South. All the negative impact is just like the continue to perpetuate the inequality between the South and the North, even if we say this interconnected world. But who benefits from that? And where do they extract the raw material that helps them to build those new technology? In the same time, the new technology you are dealing with, we are working with, is coming in Africa and from the DRC, where we have the concentration of those raw material that they are using. But what is happening in DRC? The killing of people, they participate to that killing to extract the mineral that they can use. So coming back to the history, it is a lesson that we can extract from the past so that to resist. It doesn't mean that I don't want to have this new technology, but there is question of ethic. How do we proceed with in just making less damage to the human being? I think that's the point too. And then Black History Month is the teaching moment that serves to that purpose.
Yeah. Do all of you have, particular stories of whether it was actually in Black History Month or what did you learn a piece of history that fundamentally changed how you understood what you had known before? I mean, that's, it's a hard question to say, find one, but if anything comes to mind, because I think that also is a main part of what Black History Month is about. For so many people, they are given an opportunity to learn something they wouldn't normally learn because of the way things are structured. And hopefully their life changes, but certainly their perspective changes on a particular thing. Any remembrances of that?
I can start.
Yeah.
So it was actually a couple of years ago. I was in my second year of the PhD program, and the New York Times had a long expose where they were discussing the history of slavery, and they went into how actually a lot of the management and organizational structure practices were actually founded in slavery, and a lot of those structures were used, and the management techniques, even some psychological techniques, are used now with employees. And that just, to me, considering how important organizational structures are, as well as human resources practices in our whole society and functioning of organization, it just made me realize how much the experiences of Black people have really founded so much of the economy, especially in America and even probably in North America as well. And it just really made me think about how I saw the rest of the research. I saw it differently, just thinking about where it was based in and how people appropriate certain things. And it was interesting because I had finished all my coursework for my PhD program, and we never learned about any of this. It was actually just then it was brought in. And I think it would be so informative to just understand this, even with scholars, how these practices were developed.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great example. And, you end with the little kicker. You weren't taught this. Mm-hmm. How can this be? Mm-hmm. Like, that's another part about an organizational structure where it has to come into the curriculum. It has to come into what's being taught. In addition, these sorts of panels that are extra to the curriculum, necessary, but they're not a replacement, in any way. Gertrude, was there ever a moment where your consciousness of your own sense of history changed because you learned something new in Black history?
Not really in Black history, but the sense of the importance of the history, how it can impact our life. And this goes back to when I was in my country, because they don't teach us about history. The history we learn is about how colonization was so good for us. We don't see the negative side of the colonization. So we praise white people for coming, saving us. And then when I start doing my research, so I realized that this is the real history of decolonization. And I think that makes me believe that the curriculum needs to be changed so that people realize that all white people didn't come to save us. And then having Black History Month, I think it is important because it opened up the conversation. Now, I think many institutions think about, okay, how our curriculum need to be look like. Mm-hmm. So that's also the message of Black History Month, because it seems that the history of Black people is not being taught being taught in the classroom. So this conversation help people to think, okay, how can we incorporate this in our curriculum, not at the margin, but the central piece of our curriculum.
Right. Jake, you've been in so many countries and also educating and been educated in several countries. What was the structure? I mean, you must notice differences across all of these countries.
Yes, definitely. I think just like Professor Mianda mentioned, when I was in Nigeria, I didn't identify as Black. No one referred to me as Black. So I remember having to fill my admission form and they were like, tick a box here. The other, I was like, and it felt very awkward to really tick Black because there was no education in terms of like, what does a Black identity mean? And so I grew up to age 26 before I first traveled out of Nigeria. I didn't come here to Canada first. So having traveled to a couple of countries, I've experienced my bouts of racism there. But, I feel that, at age 26, I don't think I was prepared. And I think, you're never really prepared, but I was perplexed. I was confused, something you can never prepare for because you don't know how, when, where, or who's going to treat you differently. But, it really started at the airport with the way the immigration officers would like interrogate and investigate. You're just traveling out of Nigeria for the first time. Are you sure you're going to go back? Are you sure you're going to go back? Prove to us you're going to go back. And even stepping out of the airport, I mean, this was not in Canada, but stepping out of the airport, the taxi drivers were just not willing to take me till like the fourth driver came through. Again, I did not understand what was going on. I just thought maybe this driver was maybe on his phone busy or he just didn't feel like taking me. So it took me a while, and it took for me to sort of internalize the identity of being Black, for me to realize that, okay, whilst in Nigeria, of course, I could see the legacy of colonial racism, but my experience was mostly around discussions and conversations. But stepping out of Nigeria, then you witness racism, right, in firsthand and in a different way. So I had to now learn this new identity of mine. And I think people just assume, well, you're Black. You should know this already. You should know that you're Black, and you should be aware. But at age 28, I was just coming to terms with, my Blackness. And sometimes I forget. I actually sometimes forget that I'm Black. Not because I'm unaware of my race, but because sometimes I'm on the TTC and I get like really weird looks, or maybe somebody just treats me visibly negatively, and I'm like, but why? I'm like, oh, I'm Black. Oh yeah, I forgot. Right. But yes, I had to do, and just like what Prof talked about, decolonization of the curriculum. I think coming to Canada, I've realized that there is really no course that cannot be decolonized. This idea that certain subjects can be decolonized, I think that's erroneous. I feel like every pedagogical experience can engage with racial inclusion. And in my opinion, I think one of the worst things post-colonialism ever did was to privilege discourse on the past whilst ignoring material conditions of the present. So when we talk about race, it's right there in front of us, right? We can see it right there. We don't have to go back and like start thinking about what happened in 1955. We can look at exactly what's going on in society today and bring that into the classroom. So I've learned to incorporate dialogue on Black history, and to also recognize that Black history is different. As a Black immigrant, my experience will not be the same as a Black person born here, even though we share the same identity and go through the same challenges.
Mm-hmm. I think that diversity should be also present. It doesn't mean it should be excluding one diversity against other, but recognize that we are diverse, we are the community, we can work together. That diversity means the person in face of me is a human being. I am a human being. So we have our common humanity, and then we can work together so to create the space that is better for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, it reminds me of when I was talking with Gertrude, and we were, noting people refer to Africa I mean, it's almost like a cliche in American, you know, on funny YouTube videos or something, people referring to Africa as if it's a country, you know, a singular entity. And yet the diversity in Africa often just gets wiped away in that linguistic trope. And a version of that comes back when we're thinking about decolonizing knowledge. And they'll say, take an African perspective. It's like, which Africa? There's, you know, there are so many different structures, and that all can play into you know, how you would approach decolonizing a topic. And for me, that project is not a thing you do and it stops. It's a thing you continually do. I mean, it's not just that something can be decolonized from many perspectives, but that the process of decolonizing the knowledge is a continuous process. It doesn't just do a thing and stop, and now you have an object of knowledge that you'll teach forever because it's true. No, you keep at it. I was wondering, in terms of marketing, when you think about the psychology of marketing, is there a similar sort of universalizing approach? And what I mean by that is, in the same way that people refer to Africa as a singular entity, which is a kind of, yeah, it's a singularizing thought process. I don't know if this is related to your research at all, but in economic structures, in business structures where there's markets at hand and profits to be had, is there diversity in how Black people are understood in an economic market? Or is marketing, I don't want to say a singular thing, but is there really a kind of racist approach to what marketing to a Black community is?
I am not economist, but this month, Black History Month, we held a conference by a professor that is from University of Ottawa, who spoke about this, that in economy, when they do the advertise, then they don't advertise Black in the position of CEO, because the idea is that Black people are poor, so they cannot be in that position. And then it's only white, the advertised white and not Black. This is because the idea Black are not good. So they don't know how to do. So in that way, I think the stigma, the psychological effect that Black, so they are bad. They just like know how to do bad thing. And then yesterday, one of the emerging scholars talk about her experience working in the bank. And then when she went there for training, it was that cliche that Nigerian can steal things. So she was coming from Nigeria. So she was so traumatized, everything she wanted to look very closely. I don't want them to come say, okay, she's from Nigeria, so she has this. And then even if a young Black man enter in the bank, she was just like, oh my God, I hope he wants to do something bad. So, and I think I'm not economist, but it's there.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a, I mean, it's I don't mean to belittle its power by saying this, but it's such a simplistic system. It's a simplifying thought process with so much power. And that is part of what I find disgusting, in that it's a simple structure, and yet incredibly powerful.
This is why Black History Month is necessary.
Yeah.
So that people can be taught about the diversity, about reaching out to others as human beings, not as just Black because they are bad.
Yeah. Well, I return to Jake as my stereotype of Nigeria. You are my definition, my starting definition.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think Nigerians we are the most populous Black nation in the world. 1 in 6 Black person in the world is Nigerian. So we're quite a lot. We are a very resilient people with a huge contribution to to Black empowerment. So I always say you find Nigerians everywhere, not because, I mean, the highest number of Black doctors in Toronto are actually of Nigerian origin. And if you look at York faculty, you find like Nigerian professors in various ranks, but it doesn't mean that you would not, just like every other group, you would find Nigerians in other aspects that, that would not be very flattering. So I think Black History Month is also very important so people can understand the dynamics, to understand the diversity that we uphold. For example, at York, I mean, I understand the multiculturalism identity that we hold, as Canadians, and that was one of the things that attracted me to come to my PhD here. But it's one thing to have like the Multiculturalism Act, to have the policy that the government sort of promotes, but it's another thing to have a one-on-one experience. Mm-hmm. So at York University every year there's like a multicultural week, and even me as a Black academic, I'm amazed to hear the Eritrean Students Association, the Ethiopian Students Association, the Congolese Students Association, the Burkinabes, at York. Then I was like Madagascar students at York. I'm like, what is going on here? I mean, I would argue that York is the most multicultural school in North America, but it took me to experience that multicultural week and to see people celebrate for a whole week. There was like music competition, dance. It was really intense at the New Student Center. And what that meant is that I was talking to my students in my TA group, and just what that meant for them is something they would take with them forever. So I know that laws are great. We're a multiculturalist country, but then it's good for people to sort of experience it one-on-one. And I'm not saying like Canada is like, oh yeah, because we're multicultural does not mean that there are no racial tensions here. I mean, we can look at that, but I just believe that when you realize that the Canadian identity is a mix and match of different people, that's the biggest strength that we have here, is how people come here together. We should be more open-minded to understanding other people's cultures, other people's identities, and what they contribute to the society.
But I think we have to stress with that it may be the Canadian urban experience of multiculturalism where there is the possibility of multiculturalism, whereas this may be a different reality to these things in anywhere sort of west of Winnipeg, in between. I don't want to single any area of the country out, so I'll just leave it as there's one thing.
I stress that diversity that is very rich, it has been expressed at the level of the students, but it should be reflected at the upper level of the York University too. Yeah. Just like small comments.
No, big comment. I mean, and it's been a big drive and anxiety and drive that the faculty complement does not match the student complement. And there's a real, for most of us, there's a real necessity that match makes an incredible difference in how education happens at this university. But I'm sort of pausing on the multicultural, both law and idea and access, but also reality of experience. Because when we were advertising this conversation, some people were sending in questions on social media, and a lot of them focused on multiculturalism, in various ways. So I'll do the most negative version where, people were saying, yeah, Canadian multicultural fantasy, and Black History Month is just a nice decoration on that multicultural fantasy. I'm sure it can be, but for others, that decoration can be so attractive that it changes your relation to multiculturalism. So that you gain your own definition, not necessarily a Canadian government or a legal definition. And it depends on how you, think about culture, think about multi, and how does it change you. those festivals and groups in the student center don't matter if nobody goes. And they don't matter if someone walks through it like a performance, but that has no, it's just something nice to look at. I think maybe the question I'm getting at here is, when you think about when you're living a life that isn't second guessing and a life of double consciousness, a life where you're always wondering about people's approaches to you, and you're wondering about Blackness, you're wondering about whether a society is going to pick you up in the taxi or not. What kind of experience does it take for people to say, oh, we have come together, this has changed my understanding of you, and therefore my understanding of me? And I mean, it's a totally hard question, but like, what kind of experience, as if there's only one? But I'm trying to sort of honor the sense of some of the questions that we're trying to get at. Well, what is a transformative experience? What does stop a kind of normalized racism that somebody has just grown up with, for years?
That's actually what my dissertation's looking at.
That's why you're here.
Yeah. It's just like, it's looking at transformative experiences for people who aren't the target of diversity and how it will change them to support diversity. But one example that is shown a lot in psychology is interracial cross contact, but this needs to be somebody of the same status as you. So for example, if you have a Black employee, it might not really decrease your racism, but if, for example, you have like a roommate who's Black, they've shown that would decrease it. There's actually like a pretty good story about one of the heads of Andreessen Horowitz. Ben Horowitz, when he was a little boy, I think his family wasn't that crazy about diversity. I don't think he really maybe had the best impressions of Blacks, but he ended up just becoming friends with a Black boy who lived on his street, and they became very close friends. And he said in his book that really changed how he saw Black people. And even now in his venture capital fund, he's done a lot of great stuff to start supporting a lot of Black owned and Black funded startups. So that's an example of how things could change. It's also, I think, when you experience, I'm also going into my dissertation about how sometimes if you experience something that's very threatening to your identity and how you see it, it can sometimes, when you're trying to understand it, you can change how you see it, other people, and like Black people. Like I know somebody, he told me when he first got to understand things more about Black culture, he was just so shocked, and it changed his world, and he just wanted to learn more and more about it, and it really transformed him and made him realize so many things he had been blind to as a white male.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean,
and I think,
sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to make a joke that I'm an endless subject of that. I mean, it's been remarkable, and I'm so thankful for it.
But I just want to say that sometimes people are racist by ignorance.
Yeah.
And then I have just a small example. I was a student. I do my study in Quebec City. So I was renting an apartment, and then my tub in the bathroom was too old. So I asked the, how do I call it in English? Concierge, I don't know how to call. And then I told her, I need to change my tub. And then she said, oh, it's just like new. And then she came to see it. And it was, oh, it's good. So I said, okay, fine. One time I invite her to have to share a lunch with us. So she was, oh, so you're eating like us? I said, yeah, okay. And then we went in the bathroom. So, and then he looked at my tub and just whip it like this and said, oh, I thought it was when you take your bathroom, then because of your skin, So my skin, when I just take and that is because the ignorance. And then from that day, she changes my tub. And then we become friends. Ignorance. Yeah, and then the cliche. One young boy was selling chocolate. And then he knocked to my door. I opened, he was just, oh my God. I said, okay, what is going on? Oh, what did you do to come here? Just, I came to study. So what about your clothes? Did you buy it here? I said, no, but from Africa. So he said, oh, so what about the Tarzan monkey? I said, that is the movie. It's not the real life. And then also the movie perpetuates this image of Africa. They are living up the street or up the tree. And I think it's a combination of ignorance, a combination of the message that is being putting out there.
Although I will add to that yesterday or the day before, Andrea Davis and Carl James were talking about anti-racist pedagogies. And Andrea gave a very simple definition of the racist. The racist is the person who is unwilling to learn. And there's some power to that, you know, where it gives a little bit more punch to the idea that there is a certain kind of racism that is just ignorance. But if it's a maintenance of ignorance over the course of a life, that is a very active racism. And I think it brings it back to Black History Month as something that is designed, it must interrupt that ignorance, because it is a function of racism, especially as time goes on.
But it is reproduced through our institution too.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly.
Yes. And I feel like, sorry? No, go ahead, Dean.
No, I'm sensing Anessa who keeps poking me. There are so many questions.
Questions. Okay, great.
So, no, Jake, did you want to go ahead? And I know you were going to share a comment. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, you know, yes, sometimes we can understand that certain people are ignorant, but there's a minimum core expectation for like civility, right? You don't need to be taught to be nice to other people. You don't need to be taught to treat other people just like you would want them to treat you, right? I understand ignorance, like not understanding certain issues of what it means to be Black, and that's why we have Black History Month, right? But sometimes and just like Prof said, yes, there is the institutionalism of how, you know, people just take their perceptions of Blackness and Black people from, you know, from the movies or cartoons or from what they don't see or what they're told. But some of it is just, you know, people just really like want to take the piss, right? Like there's a minimum expectation for a Canadian. I mean, Canada is the most educated country in the world, you know, and Japan is number 2. So quality, right? But hey, I think we can get to the questions.
You're an idealist.
No.
You're a Pollyanna idealist. Anyway, Anessa.
Yeah, so we actually got quite a few questions and I'm trying to theme them up. But one question that keeps showing up is, what is the greatest hindrance to racial harmony and why?
I can go.
Yeah, please.
I would say hierarchy. I think racial hierarchy is the biggest young, and the first time they see someone different is when they're 26. You know, they could have already had like hardened racist perceptions or preferences and beliefs. So when we set racial hierarchies, then comes power, and power legislates racism on both micro and macro levels. And then, you know, when you see with the proliferation of social media now, if you don't have a one-on-one engagement, like you don't have Black History Month, and your first engagement with Black people is how you see them being racialized by the police, there is this emboldening of marginalization. And then something even more painful is the pacifism. I think today with, with social media, certain people just undermine or overlook racism, or they've developed like a tailor-made or a rehearsed response to claims of racism, thereby denying the existence of racism and encouraging other people, to do the same, even if they haven't had an engagement with a Black person one-on-one. So I think in an effort to tackle racism, America got it wrong in like 1964 when they outlawed segregation without mandating integration. So the law says you can no longer write white only or no Blacks allowed, but it did not mandate integration. When we think of racism, sometimes people grow up and it's just the fear that they have, the fear that, they might feel inadequate if other people that, just that fear. And that fear can come with a lot of oppression on another group, or that thinking of superiority or a hierarchy. So in my opinion, I think we can prevent racial hierarchy and we can prevent this fear by mandating integration, mandate integration in our personal lives and family, mandate integration in our classes, faculties, and boards, mandate integration in our youth leagues, in our hockey teams, and in businesses, right? Because when we dismantle these hierarchies, we can move from a place of fear to a place of familiarity.
Yeah, may I add some thing that if we agree that race is socially constructed and it started at one point of history, that the population around the world was classified based on race and then the control of labor. So we're going back to the slavery. And then we keep socializing people with this kind of hierarchy, and it has been reproduced time to time. Mm-hmm. So for us to change it, and with its negative impact, the psychological impact too, it's hard to change, but I believe that in socialization, and I take Black history part of this socialization, that when we talk about it, we have an impact in socializing people to see the difference and to question this kind of hierarchy. Yeah. It's not easy, the impact, but if we take a stand that this is the way we want to go, we want to deconstruct this racialized way of organizing society. Mm-hmm. Step by step, but it's not easy, but I believe that we can change that through socialization, through our discourse, and why through in the school, decentralize the curriculum. Is part of that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just echoing the other sentiments, I see hierarchy as a major role, particularly power and access to resources is a big differentiator. So I know we talked earlier about how like people will tend to homogenize Black people and just see as a monolithic. There's actually like a lot of research in terms of how people perceive others. When you're perceiving somebody who you perceive as less powerful or lower status, you tend to just see them as a category. You don't really individuate them. It's when you see somebody as higher status, you start to pay attention to what distinguishes them, what separates them. And I feel as if a lot of problems in terms of like inclusion, in terms of integration, is sometimes people just see Black people as valuable because we've been so marginalized and deprived of access to resources. And I think just challenging that can really change how we interact and are seen by other groups. And it also would help other groups. Like there's been research on how other ethnic groups have been able to destigmatize, and a big part of that was getting access to resources as well as power in the society. It was a similar thing that happened, for example, for Italian people. They were originally marginalized in our society, but they were able, now they are basically incorporated as a white identity, and a similar thing for other groups as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important never to, remove the history of labor and money from this complex question, because it's still integrated into how those hierarchies were set up, how access to power is organized, and you know, and monetized to reproduce itself. It's a really interesting element of thinking about the category, the categorial, and the individual. And it does relate to that idea of the transformative experience where, you know, I've had transformative experiences because of an idea, learning a new idea that really changed the shape of things. But it's so often the interpersonal, you know, that then changes the way you might rethink a category. And if you're denied the interpersonal and a repetition of it, then, you know, you just stay in the same old circulated images that are not personal in any way. Interesting.
Right. And we have another question. The term allyship is something we hear of very often. Do you have any recommendations for how white allies can truly support Black people?
This is a wish list? Okay, who wants to take that on?
Okay.
Well, that's an interesting question. What would make a real ally as you feel it and see it?
Yeah, go ahead, Camellia. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sure. So I can start. I think a really important part of being an ally is just understanding the differences in the experience, and accounting for that and how you're interacting with your person you're trying to be an ally for, because what you're experiencing will be very different from that person. And so something that you think will work for you or that you would do, it might not work for another person. Like, for example, I taught last semester for the first time. And a lot of like female professors had warned me that as a woman, I'd probably get lower evaluations, and a lot of women of color told me particularly it would be difficult. So like my supervisor, like he was aware of all this. So he just told me ahead of time, like, okay, you're probably gonna have a harder time. So why don't you just spend more time prepping for teaching? So I did spend a lot of time prepping for teaching, and I got like very good teaching evaluations. But I think if he hadn't been aware of that and just said, okay, you could just spend the same amount of time preparing for teaching as the other students, maybe my evaluations would have been as high. And I think that was a really good example that he just knew. He said, like, you know, my experience is like gonna be different from yours. You might need to spend more time teaching than me. And that's ultimately what I think it is, just helping and supporting someone and understanding and helping them navigate certain obstacles they might have in reaching the same paths.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do understand your example, but you can put so many hours you want in your teaching. If you have students that are racist, you'll get bad evaluation. It doesn't matter how many amount of time you put to prepare your teaching. Those are facts. But the way you present it, that your white colleague just like mentor you, this is the way you should go. And then I'll say by action, by the way you act as human being. And I say that's the most important thing, because having a white colleague being an ally, because he or they sees in you a human being and want you to succeed. And they cannot experience what you're going through, but because they are human beings, they can understand that I need to do this, I need to take this action to help her, to help him, to help them. So, and I think it's by your engagement as individual, then you can just show others that if we do this, we're gonna improve our community. That is why I said it's not, the burden should not be only on Black. It is our community, white and Black, to do this together. If it is just us resisting, and then we don't have this collaboration with our white colleague, our white people as a human being. And then I think the humanity is very, very important. If you don't see the Black like someone that is less than human being, you will see that humanity inside of you to work together. this is most important. Why we're talking about racism? Why I went back to the starting point of the classification of people and then the control of labor? Because they wanted to use those people they consider like less human being to do the work. And I think it's central that we go back inside ourselves and see each other like a human being equal to me. We were all created equal.
Yeah, well, I would say that there is no customary rule book for how a white ally should support us, but I like to think that allyship has to start from sincerity. Like, you have to be sincere, not because you want to be politically correct or because you want to be woke, but because you genuinely want to invest in a lifelong commitment to tackle all forms of racial oppression. So I agree, Professor Mianda, that you cannot be an ally and be inactive or quiet. I think being quietly not racist is not a thing. That's not enough, because silence many times, is complicity. But I also think that the road to allyship, may require a lot of unlearning from all the teachings that you were once thought was true. It will require you to question a lot of your stereotypes and to check your biases, and you have to do this continuously. So as an ally, you can start from your immediate circle of influence. And this could mean different things. It could mean, shutting down a racist or xenophobic rhetoric, even when passed as a joke among your friends. It could mean, taking out time to educate your ignorant family, or friends on the need to respect us or treat us with dignity and equality. It could mean standing up for us, when we are harassed, victimized or racialized even by the police. It could mean, supporting businesses that, that are Black businesses, or refusing to support businesses that disrespect or discriminate or abuse Black people. And then let's not undermine the power of politics. It could also mean withdrawing your support from politicians who are linked to racist policies. So you can start very simple based on what you can do. You can recommend a book in your, like a Black literature to your reading club, or you can even do something much more critical, like demanding that schools and workplaces enforce anti-racist and anti-oppression policies and trainings like they do very much at York. I hope other schools can actually emulate what we're doing here at York. But I'll end by saying one thing. I'll try to, I think everything I've said now should not suggest that we as Black people do not have agency over our lives, right? Many of us have led full, brilliant, and fulfilling lives powered by our own positive interiority. And so despite the external realities and, and the difficulties that we face every day in our lives, some of us try to exercise resilience and live through it. So it is crucial for allies not to develop savior complexes. As allies, we want you to support us, to encourage us, and not, be at the forefront and take glory for being an ally, right? So please support Black businesses, take Black courses, attend Black events, celebrate Black movies, And, when I talk about recommending Black movies or watching them, for other people, it might be entertainment, but for some of us, it represents visibility. It represents the validation of our lives, because we don't really see a lot of Black stories on the mainstream. So we really need allies. Black people need allies. If you look at the civil rights movement, allies played a significant role. And there is an African adage that says, if we, I'm trying to translate it in English, if we stand tall, it's because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and our allies. So, yeah.
I was going to be a little bit arch and say, is it worth having an ally if the ally is not smart? Does stupidity preclude the definition? I ask it in the context of, that old adage of, if with friends like that, who needs enemies? Which is to say, sometimes it's not allyship if it's uninformed, or if it's narcissistic, as you were suggesting. And I think, as you mentioned, the intent is lovely, but it's the effect that is more important. And then the last thing I'll ask, though, Jake, relative to your research, is, does the ally need to be human? Is to say, if I, as a good Russian hacker, can manipulate 21 million bots in your service, is that allyship?
That's a very important question, right? I think, yes, the ally does not have to be a human, because if you have an AI algorithm or a bot that is not an ally, chances of them being racist is like, it's quite a lot. So we want to have as many allies as possible. But when you talk about should a person who's not smart or knowledgeable be an ally, I feel like allyship is a journey, and certain people learn as they go, as long as they're not doing anything inimical to advancing, the rights of Black people. Sometimes I do, and this example is very, I can give many examples. Sometimes just being there as a white person is a lot of allyship, right? When you see, for example, a policeman treating someone, and you stand there as a white person, like, I'm here to see what's going to happen. That affirmation of that support, it feels really great as a Black person. Like, okay, great. Someone who's not Black is here. So they think, obviously, this is not like that person's support sort of legitimizes or gives me encouragement, right? So, I mean, people who are not smart should just keep quiet and just, be present and stuff like that. So I feel it's a journey, and, people can contribute. I always look at the intent instead of the form. I know certain people will say things like, oh, I said something, and a lot of people insulted me. You shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say that. But it came from a good place. I always say, don't fall back. Like, just stay. Like, there's a lot, even we as Black people, we're all learning, even on this platform. So we don't expect you to know it all. But the intent is much more valuable, like, than the form.
Let us also not forget that someone who's ally is taking risk too, to be rejected by its own community. True. And then every time when he or they want to say something, it's just like, oh, because that person is brainwashed by Black people. So we need to be conscious of that they are taking risk by being our allies too. And they can be rejected and being also stigmatized because of that.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Just to put a cap on that, though, is the idea that to be a responsible ally, you really have to take up that responsibility to learn. And the responsibility is one's own in community. It's not just an individualized project, but it's your responsibility to learn. It's not necessarily other people's responsibility to teach you, although that will happen because they're lovely people. And Jake here is willing to grant you graces simply for your good intent. That doesn't happen in my house.
I know.
No, I'm joking. But I think the responsibility is also important. If you're going to be an ally, you have to learn.
Yeah, and people can learn through different ways, right? There are movies, there are documentaries, and we can give lots of suggestions around. Even for we as Black people, we also need to watch more Black movies, and suggest them to our friends, right? There's a documentary called Ninth Floor. It's just a short movie, 1 hour, like 30 minutes, but it talks about a protest that was in Montreal, in George Williams University. I think it was around 1969. Yeah. And it was really remarkable to just see how such a documentary highlights how, the experiences of racism within an academic space. So, even if it goes back to old movies like To Kill a Mockingbird, I think that was like 1960s, or, Hidden Figures, we're talking about NASA, right? So in 2016, there was Taraji P. Henson, Janelle Monáe, and Octavia Spencer. They did a story. There was a story about African-American women who served as human computers, and they made contributions to NASA in the 50s and the 60s. There's even Moonlight, for example, which is, when we talk about intersectionality, which is a queer movie that highlights the struggles of being Black, and gay, and, so movies like that, documentaries like that on Netflix do help, Sure. So.
There's also the movie I'm Not Your Negro.
Yes, I'm Not Your Negro. Yes, that's another one. There's One Night in Miami. That's another one. Yeah. And there are documentaries too. Those people on Netflix, for example, Becoming Michelle Obama. That's not a good. That's not a bad one. Black is King. There's this one by, is it John Lewis? I think it's called John Lewis. And again, there's the one of a Black trans woman. It's called The Death and Life of Marsha P. Henson. Actually, it's a story of an iconic trans LGBT activist who was renowned for her role during the Stonewall in 1969. But it's interesting to see how she stood for anti-Black racism, but still stood for like the discrimination of women and for trans people. Like just a lot of struggles that one person did, and to see that her life was really just about struggle from start to finish is actually a great watch.
And then the more accurate Black Panthers that everyone liked to see.
Yeah, I was going to say, and as the English person here, movies notwithstanding, just use them as an inroad to the actual writing.
Oh yeah, and the writing is I mean, for example, there's a book by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's called Americana. Like even me reading it, I loved it. Because it tells the story of an African who moved to North America and the experience that they had to go through in a new space and all that. There's also a Canadian activist. His name is Desmond Cole. He wrote a book called The Skin We're In. That's also another one. My mom made me read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I know that's a classic as well.
Jake, this is another public presentation in which you brought mother back.
No, I think the point we're making here is just like, since it's Black History Month, people can actually read articles and literature and stuff like that.
Yeah. So we have a question that came from a few other educators and faculty members. How can we incorporate dialogue around Black History Month in our classrooms and places of work outside of just February?
So I used to think that anti-racism cannot be only focused during the Black History Month. Yeah. It is a task of every day. And even I think that having like the anti-racist lens can be in each course without targeting just the theory course on that. And there is a way of decolonizing knowledge by not central all the reading on the hegemonic way of approaching the reading. There is so many. If you are teaching, I don't know, even mathematics, which is not my area, but instead of having only the famous name that's coming from the West, so it should be some other scholar that are at the margin that you can incorporate to have a diversity of reading, the diversity of reference instead of reproducing the same people.
Mm. Yeah. Other thoughts? I mean, Camellia, as you entered the classroom, I mean, were you thinking about, anti-racist pedagogy in your teaching or no? Like teaching methods or teaching content? Did it enter?
Yeah, it actually entered naturally. So in the beginning, I was kind of like hesitant, I guess, to maybe like bring up anything that isn't just purely business, because a lot of my upper students, they kind of told me, well, if it's at a business school, people really want to learn about ways to make money, and your course is basically just focused on teaching that to them. But actually, like I had meetings with students, and some students actually said like, oh, I really want to learn more about diversity. And when I bring it up in class, people seemed really interested. And I started to introduce it just naturally. Like I would bring up hiring practices and how people might discriminate for certain reasons. I brought up how, for example, Black people, if you show an obviously like African-American name, you're less likely to be called back to your resumes. And people were so shocked by that, and they couldn't believe that was happening. And actually my final case for the class, it was on Glossier's issues with anti-Black racism and how could the company manage that. And a lot of people really liked it. So I found that students are actually quite receptive to it. I think for the current generation with all the politics and things that are going on in social media, and it's really good. Maybe you can just bring it up in terms of adding another perspective. Like this is the way it's frequently been done, but they haven't considered this is a way it could affect this stigmatized group. This is a way it could affect particularly Black people and Black employees in that company.
Right. I mean, for myself, I'll also make a plug for things like, in answer to the question, how, you open the email that talks about what the Tubman Institute is doing. You know, you join with colleagues because a particular topic looks interesting, and you go to these things and you hear so many ideas. You're introduced to different resources. Because, I mean, I, for one, will admit, I mean, you teach what you know, and what you don't know, you don't teach. And the question is how to, and Black History Month does this, how to sort of create a critical curiosity to go learn what you don't know, and all of a sudden it changes your perspective on what you will teach. But if you just teach the same thing again and again and again, there won't be any movement towards anti-racist pedagogy because you're just teaching the same old thing. But it's a serious question. How do I learn about this different ways of thinking this? How do I learn different ways of approaching pedagogy, but also knowledge? Obviously it's not the only answer, but the answer I'm using to stand in for all answers is you go to things. You go knock on Gertrude's door if she's your colleague, and you have conversations. You go to the Tubman Institute, you know, you continue to learn, and then you risk in your classes. You say to yourself, okay, I'm teaching this now, and see what happens.
Okay, so we're going to try to wrap up soon in the next 10 minutes, but I do have a question for our grad students around your student experience. Can you share a bit about your student experience being Black scholars? What can we as faculty and staff do better from a graduate student perspective?
Camellia, do you want to go first, or can I go?
You can go first.
Okay. I mean, I would just say three things. One would be to include like materials, like reading lists have like a lot more diversity there, like Black articles, or books written by by Black writers does actually help, even if you don't have a Black person in the class, right? I think the second thing would be there's always a moment to have a conversation about racism. It's always very important. Like when George Floyd happened, sometimes Black people were experiencing different things, and you have a Black student in class, and like there's just that everyone is talking about it everywhere except in class, right? You know, and I think for me, one of the things I've experienced is just how sometimes you feel very isolated, and like you just feel like you're on your own. That imposter syndrome just sort of hits you there. But sometimes it does help. I think the last point I'll make would be you can cite, you know, positive Black examples, and emphasis on positive, right? Because the dominant narrative around Blackness is not generally positive. So if in class we can see more positive examples, you know, that would actually help. And I would just end by saying, you know, I think faculty and staff need to believe Black students, right? And I don't know how to substantiate that, but just there are certain professors who are white that I just know that, like, I'm so grateful that they, you know, that they support me or that they check in, because I know a lot of the professors do not, and they avoid me and would never reply my email, would never work with me, like I don't exist, right? So those professors who can like really believe us and like can be visibly there for us, they, you know, they mean a lot. So yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I also agree with a lot of what Jake said, and I also echoes my earlier point. I guess just considering how like experiences will be different, because sometimes when I would be given advice, it was advice that I think might have worked really well for that person, and they would be like very adamant. Or sometimes, I think sometimes people will feel like, because in academia, like it's seen as like we're very intelligent, we're going to be just really beyond having those biases. That might be something that's just happening in more of the business world or outside. But academia is like part of the world as well. So those things do intrude into academia, and you have to consider that. I think also giving sometimes understanding different experiences of, like, for example, when I had last summer when they had the George Floyd, like at least the professor did reach out. They were actually, a lot of people in my department just reached out and said, like, how are you doing? Like, is everything okay? I know this must be a stressful time. And I really appreciated that they like put the effort to do that for me. So those kinds of things, I think it helps you feel like your experience is like being aware of, and you feel as if maybe if you weren't performing at your top game that week, it's going to be accounted for. I think that helps people feel a lot more included. And also, I think just making it clear in your organization or department that racism is not accepted. If somebody's being racist and that person's not being penalized, it's very harmful to graduate students. It makes them feel as if, well, this person's not being punished, like maybe my identity is not very valued. And I think when you see that your organization or higher up in your organization, the Amelia, are like, no, this is unacceptable, you just feel a lot safer in space.
Yeah, totally.
True.
Totally agree. Cool.
Okay, I know we've got the last 5 minutes. Professor Mianda, we did get a question around what is the Tubman Institute and how does it contribute to broadening people's knowledge of Black history? If you can just kind of share that with us. You're on mute.
Okay. The Tubman Institute is like an interdisciplinary center for research on Africa and its diaspora. It's located at York University, and then we are under renovation now. But the research we do is both historical and contemporary on Africa and its diaspora, global diaspora. And our mandate encompasses the study of pre-contact cultures and history of enslavement, history of colonizations, and it focuses on the current struggle of Black people in diaspora and globally. So, and for that, I think we do Black history, not only during the Black history, but we have, like every Thursday, we hold what we call Tubman Talk. And all our conversation is around the experience of Black people in the past and currently. So if you have it, and then it's open to graduate students, we have a caucus of graduate students. And then it's open to everyone. If you have your research that is related to Black people around the globe, you are welcome to come to Tubman. And then you can give a talk, you can share your research. We are just like knowledge mobilization, we do that. So it's open. And then what we do, that's our existence, the essence of the Harriet Tubman Institute.
Yeah, I really encourage everyone to seek out the link, get yourself on a mailing list, because I'm going to give Gertrude a plug here, because especially this year, since it's not to denigrate past chairs of the Tubman Institute, but there's been an avalanche of stuff happening through the Tubman Institute this year, and it's really, really important. So seek it out. On that note, I'm going to wrap us up. Vanessa is telling me I need to note that our participant numbers hit 225 for this, which I think is a real testament to our speakers and the topic. There's a real interest. So I want to thank you very, very much for dedicating the amount of time and your knowledge and just yourselves to this topic and to our audience. Thank you so, so much.